So here we have the magical images of the 10 Sephiroth, and I'm Joy Vernon, the organizer for the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup, and today is November 19th, 2022, and the time currently is 9:40. So that image there is from William Blake, and that's, I forget now, I think it's just called Albion, but maybe the Rose of Albion or something. And I thought that it made a good example of the magical image of Yesod, which is a strong, naked man. Often he's considered, there are variations on these, which I'll go into, but sometimes he's considered to have his arms upraised as if he's holding something, perhaps like Atlas holding up the world. And so we'll talk a bit about that. But Yesod is the treasure house of images where, or the subconscious or collective unconscious, where these things come from. And so this seemed like a very good illustration for this. So in our agenda today, we've got, I'll cover, first of all, of course, what the magical images are, and specifically what the magical images of the 10 Sephiroth are. We're going to talk about the idea between word descriptions versus visual images. These magical images use word descriptions. We'll talk about why to use them and how they work. And then the main body of our practice is going to come from this information on the 10 Sephiroth, their magical images, and other correspondences, which I'm going to supplement as an additional handout. We'll look at techniques for working with magical images in our practice and additional uses for them. So here's an introduction to magical images, and that image there is Boudica on her chariot. And if you're not familiar with her, she was a warrior queen in history, and history and mythology, I think both. And she can be used as one of the magical images for Gavura. So what are magical images? Symbolic word descriptions or visual illustrations that are repositories of both information and emotion. And again, we'll talk about this more later, but I think it's really interesting to note that these magical images often are expressed as words and not as an image. And I believe that the reason they're expressed as words is because we are being invited to meditate on them and to work with them, to visualize them, as opposed to being given the specific thing to look at. They help us connect to the astral realms or to the collective unconscious. Their power is informed by their history, repetition of use, who uses them, and how and why they are used. Magical images are facets or colors of the divine unity. When you're working with a magical image, you are working with source energy. Separating a magical image from source energy can eventually result in its battery going dead. And as we get into more examples of what magical images are and things, you'll start to notice it's like, okay, why is this concept, there might be certain concepts from history that seem like they should be powerful, but they don't have any effect on anybody anymore. And that's because they've been separated or broken from source energy and have been used out of context. And a lot of people working with something can charge it up with a fair amount of energy, but it's not ever going to have that unending life that something gets when it's filtered, when source energy is the energy that activates it. So magical images basically are living images that teach and heal. And today we're going to learn how to work with them. So here are the magical images of the 10 Sephiroth. Starting at the first one, Kether the crown. It's an ancient bearded king in profile. For number 2, Hokmah, a bearded male figure. Number 3, Bina, a mature woman. Then we come down to number 4, the blue one, Hesed, a mighty crowned and throned king. We go over to 5, the red one, Gavora, a mighty warrior and a chariot. Then number 6, the yellow one, a king, a child, a sacrificed god. Number 7 is the green one, a beautiful naked woman. Number 8 is the orange one here, a hermaphrodite. Number 9, the purple one, Yesod, a beautiful naked man, very strong. And number 10 at the bottom, a young woman crowned and throned. And so I want to, before we even go on, I want to just take a minute for you guys to just let these wash over you. Like, what are some things that come to mind? Just hearing these, do they immediately bring up detailed images for you? Do they sound confusing? Do they seem weird? Are you wondering why? I don't understand. Are you wondering what's their history? And kind of, are you feeling strong emotional reactions to some of them? Kind of let them wash over you and feel how you're responding to these. Now I'm going to invite people to unmute themselves and share any thoughts or ideas that they have just from this initial review of the 10 Sephiroth. Anybody have any response, any kind of immediate response to these?
I've got a question.
Sure.
Why is strength associated with Yesod?
That's a good question, and I wouldn't say that strength in and of itself is necessarily the key there. I think it is, Yesod is the foundation, and I think that's what the strength is referring to, that Yesod is holding up in some ways you can look at it as holding up everything above it, but in many ways it's more the foundation for those things that are below it, which is the entire manifest world. And so so I think that is more what it is, why it has the word strong in it.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I was going to say that they all seem tied in with astrology.
Oh, okay. Okay. Are
The
you
planets
noticing
as
like
associated.
planetary symbolism? That's interesting. It goes with one of my theories. So
Some of
anybody?
the images too correspond a little bit with the archangels that are part of, like, for Yesod is Gabriel, which is the strong one or the strength of God or something like that. So I think some of the images play too. But what you were saying about the foundation, yeah, it's like that strength, you know, like even if you look at a building, you know, like the foundation, if you have a crack in your foundation, you're kind of screwed, you know.
Yeah.
And the strength to like purify everything too, because it's the emanation that, or like, purifies all that comes before or below, and so that requires like a mental fortitude.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Any other thoughts or comments or experiences, questions?
I'll say one more thing. It does seem like, most of the images, if not all, I guess, they're very personified, right? It's about people. It's people imagining people, kings, queens, mother, strong man, in different states of age or dress, or, as opposed to like, a tree or
Well, and that's really significant. And I did not specifically touch on that. Gareth Knight outlines a series of symbols that can be used as magical images, and I don't remember the whole series of them, but one is a map, and like the tree of life is a map, and so that can be a magical image. And then he goes into some specific objects and things. So magical images don't have to be people. They can be a map, an object. He goes into places, visualizing places, whether it's outdoor places, places of power, or temples or something. And then eventually one of the further along types, like it all culminates in magical images as people, and those are guides. So the point is very well taken, that because and it's good to note as well the idea that not all magical images are people. However, the ones that are people are guides. And so the fact that the 10 magical images of the Sephiroth are all people is really relevant to the fact that they are guides for us to work with.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I said I wanted to briefly address the idea of word descriptions versus visual images. And this has really been going through my mind a lot, particularly because I became very fascinated with the Decanic images many years ago. I first learned about it through Ben Dykes's website. And the thing is with those, when I first learned about them, of course, my first response was, well, I want to see the picture. Don't just tell me what the picture looks like. I want to see the picture. Where did it come from? And I finally realized after exploring, and then I've come across people online, and that's often the first response they have too, is, well, where are the pictures? Show me the pictures. I want to be able to look at all those details and verify, and things like that. Well, there aren't pictures for the Decanic images, not originally. Since then, people have illustrated them, but not originally. As I explored this more, I came across this information from Ficino, who is a philosopher and writer that greatly has influenced modern occultism. And he distinguished between forms that can be seen, such as an actual picture, an illustration, a statue or something, forms that are imaginable, which is things that we have to think about or can imagine that can't necessarily, maybe can't even be graphically represented possibly, and written characters. And you'll notice that that a lot of times in magical practices, these three things are combined: the form that can be seen, the form that is imagined, and the written character or additional words or names that might be used around it. I also came across the term ludibrium, I don't know how to say it, I'm guessing, or if somebody knows, unmute yourself and tell me. Ludibrium, and the plural ludibria, I don't know, ludibria probably. Anyway, these are vivid stories that use magical images, and the classic example is the chemical marriage of Christian Rosenkreuz in terms of that alchemical allegory. But another example that was given in one of the resources that I was studying was a fairy tale by Goethe with some woman and a snake or something. I wasn't familiar with it, but these are vivid stories that use magical images. And so I think above and beyond allegories, these probably have an allegorical component, but I'm guessing, not being very familiar with this aspect of it, I'm guessing that there is a lot of word descriptions in those stories to really create a very vivid scene. Actually, The Sea Priestess by Dion Fortune is probably an example of an entire novel that uses extensive detailed word descriptions to create magical temples and rituals. And so examples of text magical images are, of course, the decanic word descriptions. That's what most people are familiar with now because they are really popular with the with Austen's book 36 Faces. They've become a lot more common now, and more people are familiar with those, but we can go above and beyond that. Clearly, these magical images for the 10 Sephiroth are text based, and Gareth Knight kind of mentions that a lot of Kabbalistic imagery comes from kinds of text descriptions. Examples of visual magical images are like Christian teaching images. A lot of times stained glass windows in particular were designed to tell a story or specifically to teach something. And these were used also to help people that were illiterate understand things about the church. So these were people that didn't know how to read, and they were given images to work with. Other examples of visual magical images, of course, alchemical illustrations and our favorite tarot cards. Dion Fortune points out that all visualization work resides in Yesod. Yesod is one up from the bottom of the 10 Sephiroth, so, or 9 down from the top, 1 up from the bottom. So, so the very bottom Sephira is the world that we live in, and you go up 1 level to Yesod, and that's where imagery, including dreams, including fantasies or visualizations, all of those things reside in Yesod. And so I think my take on this is that it's very, very important to open up the Yesod level. It is the astral level and opens up intuition, psychic abilities. It opens up the archetypes of the collective unconscious. And yet at the same time, even though it's very important to open that up, it's also very important to eventually move beyond it and move into the higher levels of the tree. And the reason I say that is because, for instance, when I teach Reiki, it's very common when you get initiated into Reiki that the psychic levels are opened up and people start seeing things. They start seeing colors. A lot of times they'll get psychic impressions. And it's also very common for students to think that they've achieved some great, high level achievement. Now they're seeing colors and they're getting these psychic impressions, and they really cling to it. And I had a student that for years after she had studied with me would email me and say, I saw this image while I was doing a session. What does it mean? And I don't know what it means. You got to work with it. You got to figure it out. That's your job. You don't even need to get images. That's keeping you down at the Yesod level. And there's other levels to work at. Not that the Tree of Life has anything to do with Reiki at all, but it was just my way of explaining it, because it was the symbol system that I was most familiar with. So all visualization work resides in Yesod. It's important to open it up, but it's also important to be able to climb past it, climb higher on the tree for deeper spiritual experiences or additional psychic or mystic experiences. Dion Fortune, as an example of additional psychic experiences, is like, just getting images is not that great when you can communicate mind to mind or something like that. So that from what I remember is an example that she gave, very badly misquoted, I'm certain. So why use magical images? We use them to tune into specific psychic energies. In the case of the magical images of the 10 Sephiroth, we're using them to contact the deeper, more fully dimensional energy of each Sephira. One thing about images is that they have an emotional component, and study does not usually include the emotional component. Study usually is just going to be about ideas. And so if we study the Tree of Life or the tarot or anything else, we get one aspect of it. But by working with the visual component of it, and that can be visualizing what it looks like, it can be visualizing these magical images, but even in terms of science, visualizing how something works. Like if I put this together and that together, and it can be mechanical, and then what would happen? How does that machine work? That's opening up that other side. Visualizing how the universe works is an example of that. So there's scientific applications for this, but primarily we're not going to be discussing those. We'll be discussing the magical uses. But it opens a more fully dimensional energy of each Sephira, primarily through incorporating the emotional component, but also this ultimate living energy behind that. It opens the psychic and spiritual realms. It helps stimulate communication with guides. And brain work, this is one of my favorite ones because it's really practical. Not that opening psychic and spiritual realms isn't like a great thing to do for your own growth and healing, but on a really physiological level, the occipital lobe is the visual processing area of the brain, and it processes color, form, and motion, among other things. Stimulating the occipital lobe increases production of serotonin. And I did find a specific that there's a little bit of a, like in a lot of, there's a little bit of a kind of a I can't think of what the right word is, like it's just an intuitive sense. It's like, oh well, if if the occipital lobe affects serotonin, then stimulating it should increase the serotonin. But I actually found a study, which I link to. I'll give you the handout in a minute, but I link to that and all my other sources, or I list all my sources, including a link to that article in the handout, which I forgot to give you and will give you after this. So, and what does serotonin do? Serotonin reduces anxiety and depression and increases a sense of well-being. It also improves memory and offers lots of benefits. So, on a very physiological health level, the idea of working with visualizations is very useful for your own sense of well-being. Gareth Knight says the unconscious mind works in pictures. And so the idea of using these pictures to access the unconscious mind is part of what we are doing here. So how did the magical images work? First of all, it's a question of looking within rather than observing what is outside of you. You are looking within. And that also, even if you do have an actual illustration that you're looking at or working with, it's still not just about looking at that illustration. It's being able to take that illustration and explore it internally. When we send our awareness to the subconscious level, it returns with the archetypes of the collective unconscious. And these ideas on this slide are a combination of info from Gareth Knight and from W.E. Butler. Visualize a magical image to activate these ancient archetypal patterns of the collective unconscious. When brought into consciousness, the personality resonates in sync with them. And so basically, we start with a few words like a bearded old king, or bearded old man, just something very basic, right? And then we bring it in and work with it with our imagination and exploring it on the subconscious levels. That's going to then activate the archetype that we have access to via the collective unconscious, as explained by Carl Jung. And when we activate the archetype, then it comes up out of our inner connection to that collective unconscious, and it rises up and becomes conscious to us. And that includes not just a simple, like there's an archetype of the old man, right? It's not just that, it's all the energies around that. W.E. Butler describes it as lines of force, and he compares it to salt. And when you take salt water, put water and salt in a jar and shake it up, you can't see the salt. And then if you let the water evaporate, the salt is there in crystals. It's like, that's kind of what we're doing. We're letting this water evaporate so that we can see these underlying lines of force, or these underlying patterns or structures that form these archetypes. And by bringing them into the consciousness, they form, that's the evaporation part. We can connect, we can embody those lines of force, those archetypal patterns. Our personality resonates in sync with them, and that can transform us. And so going through all of these different archetypes one by one and letting each affect us can greatly transform ourself, our personality, our healing. And again, because all of these images get their power from divine source, it gets us more and more in touch with that highest spiritual level. These images can strengthen, refresh, or balance parts of the personality. So you'll always start in any practice by connecting to the divine to keep the channels as clear as possible. Divine unity is the source of power for all magical images. But you can also let your own life experience, memory, and learning guide the form of these images. So it's important to have a sense of connection to them. If they feel foreign, you're not going to resonate with them. So you want to explore the universal part of the image. How does it show up in your life, in your personal history, in the stories that you learned? And so finding examples of these images in stories that you're already familiar with is a really great way of working to connect with these. Always, again, under the within the context of having first connected with divine source and letting that animate this and guide our experience. And then once you've really connected with this and found the animated, the living part, the living pattern that underlies the surface image, then you can simply be open to receiving guidance or wisdom from these archetypes. It's not just about visualizing as an activity, it's also about receiving additional information. And one of the ways I started to conceive of these magical images as images that can teach. Again, the idea of guides plays into that. Here's another way of looking at this, and this is from Gareth Knight. He says that Yesod, number 9, the purple one right here, Yesod is the treasure house of images, and that's a Kabbalistic title. We can call it the subconscious. Yesod receives images from Hod, which is the literal details of the image, and from Netzach. Hod is intellect, Netzach is emotion. Hod gives us the detail of the image, Netzach gives us the feeling of it. So Hod provides the conscious or intentional pattern of the image, Netzach creates the emotion that fills those images. But all of these things down here, and we're down here at Malkuth, all of this experience of working at this level, which is the level of the magical images and these visualizations, are reflections of stuff that's working at higher levels. And so the idea again is to activate these images and get in touch with them, but then use them to learn about and connect with higher levels. So, and this illustration here is from, I don't remember what it's from, but it's a hermaphrodite. And honestly, it's kind of hard to see, but she has a little penis right there. The hermaphrodite is the archetype for number 8, Hod, the intellect, the one that's orange on the tree. So the 10 Sephiroth, they're magical images and other correspondences. And that I told you it was a short slideshow. And so this opens the way for us to go into our practices. So let me go over the last couple slides and then we'll do that. So here are the works cited. I won't go into all of it. I pulled a lot from Gareth. Gareth Knight really emphasizes magical images quite a bit in his writing. And one of the things that kind of triggered me, it's like you get these things from all these different places. You get these experiences of working, like, you learn Reiki, you start seeing colors, whatever. Then, I like tarot cards. I like looking at the images. I start staring at them. I start thinking odd things. It's like, oh, cool. Then Gareth Knight talks about magical images and he's like, tarot cards are magical images. It's like, oh, wait, this is fascinating. And then he goes on and then he explains these other things and you come across these you start studying studying Kabbalah and you come across the magical images of the Sephiroth. But then reading Gareth Knight, he starts talking about, oh, the magical image of such and such is this. And it's like, wait, where are you getting these? I don't know where they all come from, to be honest. I don't know that anybody does because nobody mentions it. But yeah, there's quite a bit there. Even though Gareth Knight talks about it a lot, the best simple, clear description of it was in Walter Ernest Butler, Magic, Its Ritual, Power, and Purpose, which you can get a paperback copy on Amazon for $8 or $9. Actually, it's a little tiny book. John Mike Dan Fortune definitely talks about it, but not with the level of excitement that Gareth Knight does. John Michael Greer definitely considers magical images to be very, very important in terms of personal development and ultimate understanding of the tree of life and ultimately pathworking, and he includes them pretty early on in his the way he teaches meditation, teaches meditating on them. This article here, serotonin release in the occipital cortex, that's the article I mentioned. And then this other article is really fascinating about Ficino, but I didn't really have time to include all of the information from that. But those are the 3 categories of images, which was the images, the forms that can be seen, forms that can be imagined, and written characters. And it goes on to discuss them in terms of talismans and things like that. You can also go to my website. I have, in fact, I'll go ahead and pull. I forgot to pull these up ahead of time. I'll see if I can get them for you. But that's a Sephiroth short list of correspondences, which is useful to give you additional correspondences and symbols to work with when you're working with the magical images. And then the names of power for the Sephiroth. I've got a handout for that. And those working with the names of power, we'll see that in a minute when we get into how to work with these. But that also that's a good and easy but powerful way to connect with that divine source so that you know you're working on the right level. And this is just the end of the slideshow, but thank you for attending Magical Images. Obviously, we still have a lot of practice to do and things like that. My website, joyvernon.com, has more information. My blog, you can find at completelyjoyous.com. Follow all of our great events at the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup. We meet on the 3rd Saturday of the month for general interest tarot and astrology, and our one next month is on pathworking, and we'll be using the magical images to enter into the paths. So that is that will be a great class, and again, very practice oriented, and will pull from what we learned today. Please subscribe to me on YouTube. And of course, if you are interested in making a donation, you can do it via PayPal to joy@joyvernon.com. Okay, so that was fast. Yay. So does anybody have any thoughts or questions again so far before we get into the practice of this? And meanwhile, I'm going to pull up the handout while you guys think about it.
I had a thought that I'd be curious about other people's insights on.
Yeah.
It's nothing, earth shattering, but was just thinking, what you were saying about the magical images coming from source. But then also kind of being filtered through our own experiences and filters. And so, I was just thinking about, like, for example, like for Kether, the image of a bearded old man, like in some situations, picturing like a very old man could bring up feelings for one person of like frailty or being near death or just old age and whatever that means to someone personally. But then for someone else, it would bring up images of like wisdom or experience or perseverance, you know. And so it's interesting that each of these, especially the parts where you're talking about people, because it's such a personal thing for each of us, you know, looking at youth or age, you know, just all the different shades and that whole spectrum of what old age might mean or what a young woman might mean to somebody, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the images I don't know, you said the images come from source, which is true, but it's more like it's also that source powers them.
Or yeah, that's a better way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just it's a tiny nuance, but it's
Right.
something I want to kind of keep going there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing, I've uploaded the notes and so you can look in the chat now and get those notes. And that includes, in fact, let me share my screen because I believe I have this pulled up somewhere. So here's the notes document. And this is my, these are my notes from today. And so this is where we're going now. We're going into here, the 10 Sephiroth, their magical images and other correspondences. And here, Gareth Knight, those short images that I described, that I gave you in the slideshow, those are what Gareth Knight includes in his book, A Practical Guide to Kabbalistic Symbolism. Now, again, nobody says, none of the authors I've read have stated the origin of these other than to say that they're from Kabbalistic texts, and they don't even say which ones, and I'm not familiar with these. So kind of keeping that in mind, I list for each of these Sephiroth. Now I start in this here, I start at the bottom. So, and actually when you're meditating with them, John Michael Greer usually has you work with the Sephiroth top down, which is what we call the lightning flash path, starting with 1 and working to 10. So when you're going through his meditation process, you do several stages of meditation prior to getting to this point. But once you're sufficiently trained in basic meditation, then he has you start working with the magical image of Kether and work with that for a week or a few days or something, and then go on to the magical image of number 2, Hokmah, and coming down through the 10 Sephiroth. And likewise, then when you work the paths, you start at the bottom of the tree and work up. Now, for what I have discovered when working with students, particularly when I'm doing a general interest type of thing, where some people might be highly experienced, but some people might have very little experience, whether in meditation or practices, or whether in the Kabbalistic symbolism, or even in the tarot, I think it does tend to be a little more user-friendly to start at the bottom and work your way up. So we are going to be working more with the lower levels today. But Malkuth, the text that Gareth Knight gives is a young woman crowned and throned. John Michael Greer expands on this based on his own extensive meditations and multi-year process of meditating through the Tree of Life. And even Gareth Knight, when he describes the best way to go about the study of the Tree of Life, it's a many-year process to explore it. And just these 10 images are just they're not even the very beginning of it. I mean, just there's things that even precede this, but they're kind of they're kind of a good entry level, but still entry level, but advanced. I don't know what that means. Intermediate. They're intermediate. So John Michael Greer expands on these based on his own experiences. And so he has a young woman in a robe of mixed earth colors. He includes the color because a lot of people respond very strongly to color more than other things. Her feet are bare and her hair unbound, sitting on a throne of roughly shaped black stone. Just as an example, early on when I was doing meditations around these, you'll as you work with these, you'll get your own imagery. And so I saw her really more in much, not just the earth colors, but mostly in dark colors. And I saw her in a cavern. And so that's some of the experiences that when I worked with it, that got kind of added on. Those are the colors. In case you do want to work with the colors, citrine, olive, russet, and black are the traditional colors. Just black is a good way to start if you have trouble visualizing colors. The god name is Adonai. The handout that I provided the link to, and then in tarot, and this is really easy. So the 10th Sapphire Malkuth gets the tarot 10s. You can also add in the pages or princesses, but for the purpose of today, we're just going to work with the numbered cards. So the 4 10s. Number 9, Yesod gets the tarot 9s. And again, here's the Magical Image by Gareth Knight, followed by the one by John Michael Greer, and so on and so forth. And so the next thing that I wanted to do is to explore these in a little bit more detail. In fact, let's go ahead, since Penny brought up the one for Kether, that ancient bearded king in profile. That is the typical one that's given. I like John Michael Greer's quite a bit because he says the faint outline of a human face looking toward the viewer's right, seen through brilliant light, no details, not even gender, can be made out. And that gives a lot more information, I think, in terms of accessing that energy of Kether. But the thing is, and this is how this process works. So John Michael Greer started with the idea of an ancient bearded king in profile. And so he's like, okay, so I'm picturing the ancient bearded king, la da 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 da. And then he adds in, he's like, okay, well, what can I learn about it because it's associated with Kether? And he adds in his knowledge of the symbolism of Kether, which is the first emanation out of the limitless light. And so it's a concentration of light. And so he's like, okay, so I'm seeing this in profile and the light is coming from really behind it. So it's almost a silhouette. Because the limitless light is beyond Kether. And so it's very shadowy. It's hard to make out features. There's also, there's still, even though the light is behind it, in some ways the light surrounds it, and that it just gives us this very faint, ghostly image. So for instance, again, I was trying to find, I wanted to work back and forth between giving you an opportunity to try to imagine these things, but also giving you some touchstones for people that have more difficulty imagining something. So this, to me, now this is a female figure, but it has a lot of those qualities. It's facing the wrong direction, but it is, it's looking down. It's got a great deal of light. It does seem female, but it doesn't have to be. And so, especially if you even come in much closer to it, there's nothing specific about that face that has to be female. So it could be either gender. And the fact that it's very little detail, that there's a great deal of light around it, that's very similar to the magical image of Kether. And I thought some of these even kind of, again, express that, not quite as well as that one. Let me see if I don't think I had another. So those are just a couple examples. So what, I guess it's kind of hard. The thing with these practices is like, just go do it on your own. That's how it works. It's much harder to do it in a group as a guided experience. And I actually had like this really detailed guided meditation, and I like scrapped that. I'm like, okay, that's not going to work. So what I want to do, I guess this is the next question I have. So when you think of that idea of no gender can be seen, it's bathed in light, how does that differ for you from the other image of a bearded, ancient bearded king shown in profile? How does that augment, change, deepen, morph the first one?
Well, seen only in profile makes me wonder, what gender is the other side?
Nice. That's actually the magical image of Da'at, though, I think is a face with two faces looking two directions, but one is the two faces are each gender. But interesting. Yes, good question. I like that, actually. There's something hidden about it. Once you remember that it's in profile, there's absolutely something that's hidden about that, and that's important. What else?
I guess it kind of makes it more whole, and unified before details of, it's like a bearded, like you had on your page, like there's not the details of the beard or the lines on the face. Like it feels more Kethery, like is more unified and whole, like it's more like potential, like before these ideas really start taking form.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you, and that's my experience too, Penny. Do you guys have a sense of a mythological character that might match up with that description, or even something from a fairy tale or from any story that you've heard? For
the bearded one, because I like Lord of the Rings, I always go Gandalf.
Yeah.
But for the more like genderless, unformed, I can't think of the movie, but there's a movie where like there's a scene where like a figure is coming towards someone, but they're backlit, so you can't really see their face and you don't really know. And I just can't think of the movie, but I can picture like the person watching, and because you don't know, like, is it going to be someone scary? Is it like someone they want to see? But it's just this idea of they're kind of backlit and bathed in light. So all you can see is like a form. And that, I guess, is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. Well, and even going Gandalf and going to some of those other similar archetypes like Dumbledore, that one scene where towards the end of the last movie, I guess, Dumbledore, I think he's already dead, but I forget what happens, but Harry ends up in this like imaginary realm that's all white, and and then it turns into King Cross Station or something, and Dumbledore shows up. But the idea of that white room that is very popular in movies and TV, just something where everything kind of fades out. And it's often used to represent death or to represent being unconscious or something like that. That's a really good example of that kind of expression in pop culture.
Totally.
And that's true, that it's a blankness, an emptiness, or a formlessness that is that Penny used the word potential, and that's a really good word for Kether, that it is prior to coming into being. There's a great deal of potential. Mythologically, you can explore the idea of phanes, which means light, and he, in the creation mythology, when the world egg cracked, what came out of it was phanes, which is light. It's also a hermaphroditic being, that is a divine being that is like the source of like parent to all following generations. Any other thoughts or ideas on that one? So let's go ahead and work a little bit with the what am I gonna do? Did you guys all pull open the notes, the Magical Images notes document, so you have access to it? If so, go ahead to page 3, and we're going to look at Malkuth again. So the traditional image is a young woman crowned and throned. And John Michael Greer's more detailed edition was a young woman in a robe of mixed earth colors, her feet bare and her hair unbound, sitting on a throne of roughly shaped black stone. I'll tell you a very modern way of working with these images is try putting them into an AI generator, art generator, and you'll get the practice of trying to tell somebody else what you see in your mind, because it's like, oh yeah, whatever, a woman, her feet bare on a stone throne, and you put that in and it gives you something that's like, this is not right at all. And so learning to refine, like, first of all, if you think you don't visualize, please go and do that exercise. Put those words into an AI generator, and when it comes up wrong, you'll realize that you've been visualizing, because you're like, no, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and it's not the way it's supposed to look. So yeah. And
that reminds me of when you read a book and then they make a movie out of the book, and you're like, that's not how that guy's supposed to look at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's just kind of a fun way of working with these. But when I was doing that, one of the things that was driving me crazy is that they kept having the woman leaning to the side, or she had her legs crossed, and like, no, feet on the ground, knees together. And it's just like, her hands are supposed to be on the arms of the throne, but they were having trouble pulling up thrones in the AI. I was like, I don't know. Apparently you need to be some kind of expert to use these things. I can't get anything good to come out of those. Well, anyways, okay, I remember we were talking. So as I continued, and again, when I had done work with this before, I saw her in a cavern and some things like that. But I went ahead and tried to explore some images. So let me share my image folder again. And there were some, like a woman in dark on a stone throne, barefoot, that definitely comes up. This is apparently this woman is supposed to be in a graveyard, and I do think that there is some legitimate energy to that Malkuth energy that could support that. I kind of liked this one, and that first one was just some kind of digital art thing. I'm not sure where it came from. This is Edmund Dulac. And this is very close to what I see. It has kind of the dark, shadowy background. This is ice. This is the Snow Queen. But if you didn't know the story of the Snow Queen and just wanted to use the image, if you could revisualize this as being black stone instead of ice, and have her draped in earthier colors or more black. And then the bare feet, the hands at the side, more of a symmetrical front-facing viewpoint. All of that to me is a very good imagery for Malkuth. But ultimately, this is Persephone. And when I finally came across this, it's like, oh my gosh, this is almost perfect for what I see. And then the fact that she was in a cavern and thing, I'm like, oh, right, I was visualizing Persephone. And so she's the queen of the underworld. And the bare feet flat on the floor, her arms on the armrests of the throne, looking straight forward. This is literally carved in stone. It's not black, but it definitely has a lot of the energies that I was going for. So that to me is is like a very good example of that. And even adding in the story of Persephone, to me has certain relevances. And again, and Penny kind of pointed this out, it's like very important to have a personal connection to the imagery, but at the same time, you also want to always be seeking the connection to divine source. But other than that, these are archetypal, so they will be present. These images will be present in all cultures. So I'm going to be extraordinarily limited in terms of what my experiences are, what artwork I'm familiar with, what stories I read, and all of that. But these are archetypes, so they are available to all in all cultures, and there will be examples of these images and stories from all world cultures. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go back to sharing the notes. Well, does anybody have any, before I do that, does anybody have any questions or comments? You guys are super quiet today. I'm kind of low energy. I don't know if that's part of it. Maybe everybody's just low energy. No questions, no comments. Okay. So I would encourage, that was an example of what I consider a practice. So hopefully, even if you're not sharing, you're going through the mental gymnastics of trying to think of, how do you see this when I describe it? When I show you an image, is what you see in your mind the same as what I show? What would you change about that image to make it what you're seeing in your mind? And also, what stories can you think of? And it might take a little bit more than just like oh yeah, I've got one right here. But that's why we meditate on these things, and that's why it can take, it's not just like you meditate on it one day and you're done. You know, you can meditate on it over and over again until you really start to learn all that it has to teach you. I'm going to go back to sharing the notes document again. And so, okay, so working with magical images. These are some of the steps that I kind of gleaned from the various sources I was reading, plus interspersed my own understanding and interpretation of this type of work. Plus how I was taught in certain, through various organizations, how I was taught to work with magical images as well. And so the idea of familiarizing yourself with them through researching or reading about them. And again, the handout that I gave you has, in many ways, the majority of info that you need to do, that you need for this. But reading Gareth Knight, particularly a practical guide to the Kabbalistic symbolism, reading John Michael Greer, Paths of Wisdom, those are going to be really good places to go into a lot more depth about understanding these. But, you know, pursue your own research as well. In addition to researching it, gain a personal understanding through writing about it, journaling about these images, drawing, coloring, sculpting, or enacting them, working with them on an artistic level. Remember that it's not just the knowledge of it, but it's the emotional component. And we find the emotional component through our personal experience, which is that which you can explore via journaling, artistically creating these, and so on. Then once well, and this is not in order, you can do these in any order actually, then start to learn to build them up in your mind through visualization. And the thing that I recommend for this is I think of it as a scanning technique, although technically the scanning technique takes for instance, an image like a tarot card, and you scan, and I learned this from Donald Michael Craig, you scan the top, like 1/4 inch of the card, and then you're just like your eyes are like a scanner on a scanner. You look at the top 1/4 inch, and then the next 1/4 inch, and then the next, and you kind of memorize the whole card section by section, and then you close your eyes and visualize it and build it up 1/4 inch at a time. Now it's harder when that's a really good way of working with visual images, but when you're working with word descriptions, it might not be so clear as a 1/4 inch at a time. It might be, especially with Malkuth, I like starting with her feet. Just seeing those bare feet in black stone, and then building up, what does the hem of her garment look like? Do I see the whole throne that she's sitting on? What do I see about her clothing as I visualize that? Typically for me, she does have kind of a classical draped gown on. You know, does she have any jewelry or anything? I don't typically see her with any kind of jewelry. And then kind of looking as it builds up in your mind and you go through section by section, start to get into more details. Can you see her face, and so on and so forth. And so that's how you build it up in your mind, through visualization. And you can ask yourself questions. You can be like, oh, because sometimes you see funny things. It's like, oh, I'm visualizing her feet. Oh, she has a toe ring. Ha ha ha, that's funny. And that's fine. But then you can ask, does she have a toe ring? Is this right? Remember to, you know, connect to spirit and allow spirit to help guide you in understanding that. And maybe she does. There's no reason that she wouldn't. But, you know, is that right? Is it wrong? I don't know. You know, let yourself explore these things as you work. Then after you're able to really visualize the image itself, then work with it through meditation and contemplation. And meditation is simply to think about something. John Michael Greer teaches it as discursive meditation, and I do have a post about that on my website. Discursive meditation, and that is I'll get you after we're through here. I'll get you the link to that one too. But that's thinking about something. And the idea is to focus your thoughts on this one topic. So you can explore it through thought, through asking questions, through just kind of just thinking. It's just like, would she have a toe ring? I'm going to ask that as a question. I'm going to think about that. No, I kind of feel like she doesn't. I feel like she doesn't wear any jewelry, but now that if she's Persephone, she would have maybe the riches of the underworld all around her. And so I'm thinking about it and trying to explore, is that right? Is that part of who she is? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So on and so forth. Contemplation is more about feeling than thinking. Butler referenced Saint Ignatius in terms of getting some more information on this. So that's literally the top link for Ignatius. Spiritual Exercises is the title of the book that he wrote. Anyway, that was basically one of the top returns that I got when I Googled it. So I'm not recommending that link. I'm just telling you what I looked at. So exploring these images, being able to build up the image and then exploring it through thought processes and through how does this make me feel. I always like structure, and so I came up with a very detailed approach to how to work with these things. And do it if you like, and if not, don't. So of course, choose the sapphire that you wish to work with. I recommend going in order. And again, if you're more experienced with meditation and maybe know the Kabbalah a little bit, working top down from Kether down is probably the way to go. If you're less experienced with meditation or visualization, or if you're not familiar with the Kabbalah, I honestly would recommend working bottom up, starting with 10 Malkuth. I recommend going in order, but I also see the value of choosing a certain sapphire that you want to work with because it's something that's out of balance for you. And I think that some of the basic elements of these exercises can be worthwhile to work with, just like a single sapphire for that purpose. Familiarize yourself with its magical image, color, god name, tarot cards, and any other symbols you want to work with. The less familiar you are with these things, stick to fewer things. Don't try to make it hard on yourself. If you already know the magical image really well, if you already know the tarot cards really well, if you already know these other things, then you can add more. If you don't know these things well, just stick with the basics. With any kind of meditation, it's always nice to have a formal starting point. I like to use prayer position as a formal starting point. Bring your hands into prayer position to begin the meditation, set an intention. And in this case, it would be to connect with the sapphire through its magical image. Then you can place your hands in your lap, come into a comfortable meditation posture. Just do a basic body scan to see where you're at right now. Become aware of your breathing. Soften and deepen the breathing until you're breathing deep down into your belly. You can perform the fourfold breath for several minutes just to get yourself into a good meditative state. And that's breathing in for 4 counts, holding for 4 counts, breathing out for 4, and holding for 4. In, hold, out, hold. And you can continue that at your own pace for a few more rounds. Then you'll return to normal breathing. Begin to actively build that image. And for now, we can work with the image of Malkuth, the young woman in the gown of mixed earth colors, bare feet on a throne of roughly hewn stone. If you work better imagining one of the images I already showed you, you can start with that, but correct the image as you see fit, whether by changing the color of it, adding details, or whatever is takes that image and aligns it more closely with the energies of the magical image. Once the image is as fully experienced as you can make it, and you can add in, again, I've been using the word visualization, but it should activate all the senses of sight and smell and touch and hearing and taste, if that's relevant. But really feeling the presence of this. Then recite the names of power for the Sephiroth several times. And we'll just use the name of God, which is Adonai Haaretz. And you can say it silently to yourself. I will intone it, that's my practice. So I'll do that now too, as an example. Adonai Haaretz. Adonai Haaretz. Adonai Haaretz. Adonai Haaretz. The name of power is how we connect with divine source and basically plug in the image, charge the battery on the image. And at this point, let your mind switch to a state of receiving. You've actively built the image. You've actively recited the God name. Now just let it be. And let yourself receive from it. You might just sit there silently, just looking at her. She might begin to move or to talk. Maybe other symbols come up in the environment that you wish to explore. Maybe nothing happens, but that's okay too. They're all okay. If something happens, follow it. If nothing happens, just let yourself experience this energy. Next, imagine each of the related tarot cards for this image. And for this, we'll use the 4 tens. I work with them in the Kabbalistic order, which is wands, cups, swords, pentacles. So at first, I would imagine the 10 of wands and add that to the scene. I might ask her about it. I might just imagine this card in relationship to her and see what ideas come up. And imagine the 10 of cups and how it relates to her, what she has to tell you about it. And the 10 of swords. And the 10 of pentacles. And then finally, you can add the Major Arcana card that matches that number. In this case, card 10, the Wheel of Fortune. What does she tell you about it? Does she gesture or indicate anything? Do other beings enter the scene? What happens when you visualize that Wheel of Fortune card in this scene? Prepare to end the meditation. Thank the magical image for the insight and guidance that you have received. Thank any other guides that assisted you during this experience. Return to normal breathing, becoming aware of your breath. Perform several rounds of the fourfold breath to return to your own natural state of consciousness. Bring your hands into prayer position to end the meditation. Show gratitude for being able to do your practice today. And of course, I just realized that I was sharing my screen that whole time.
Well, you looked good.
So anybody have any, and feel free if you had some powerful experiences, feel free to grab a notebook and write them down. Or even just a couple insights. You don't have to have powerful experiences all the time. Even if you just got a couple insights, go ahead and jot those down. Does anybody want to share?
I have a basic question. I just don't understand really the symbolism with a young woman on a throne, because it just doesn't fit. It doesn't seem like to me. A throne, I can see a throne in a sense that Malkuth is really a structured, organized by, we're subject to physical laws, all these physical laws, and we're hemmed in by that. So I can see a throne and I can see someone overruling that structure. But I would think of an older person doing that. Got any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah. Malkuth comes from the word for kingdom, right? And so Malkuth is associated with Malka, let me see if I get it right. Malka, the queen, and Kala, the bride. I think I've got those right. Penny, help me out if I've got them backwards. So the idea that traditionally she is associated both with a queen and with a bride does make her younger. She's also associated with Bina, and Bina number 3 is the old woman. And she's the superior mother, and Malkuth is the inferior mother. And so there's a idea of someone less experienced is what that is about. So those are things that make sense for me. Hopefully that helps a little
Okay, that
bit.
helps. Yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions or anything?
Well, to piggyback off that, I believe that Malkuth has the most titles of all the Sephiroth. And so, I mean, there's tons of them. And so like what Joy brought up about like the bride, but there's a lot of like the gate of, and so a lot of that will refer to, like something that can give birth, so, or like a canal. And then Malkuth is also seen as like the fruit of the tree. And so a younger woman or princess would be more like the offspring of this legacy of action. And so that's another way to look at or kind of reconcile that idea of a young woman or a princess, in that throne. And so jumping from that, like doing the visualization, I definitely could feel like what I visualized, the way the young woman was very like, there was definitely a powerful, it wasn't just like a silent print, it wasn't just someone's daughter. It was a presence, it was something that had come into its own, the way, like, imagine an apple, it's its own beautiful, like hearty, rich thing. And so I very much felt that, and like how you describe like the rough, I can't remember, you use like rough hewn stone or something, like I could feel the grittiness of the stone. And I could feel the other elements present. Like I felt like I was in the middle of the earth. And so it almost felt like fiery lava and like flowing waters and wind, but yet it was earth. It was pretty cool.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I had some good experiences. She morphed early on, she morphed into Isis. But when I added the tarot cards and I got to the 10 of Swords, she morphed into Erish Kigal. Again, I don't know if I say these names right. But yeah. So I had like some pretty intense people I was working with.
Yeah. Do you guys remember? It's like an old picture where it's like an optical illusion. It's pretty famous where like one person will look at it and see an old hag, and then the next will see like a young maiden. Do you know the picture I'm talking about? That actually was kind of happening to me a lot. Like there was definitely like Bina was making its way where like, especially looking at the 10 minor arcanas, like it felt like this kind of flux. Like sometimes I would look and she would be that young, robust figure, and then other times it was more of like an older, still robust, but yeah, there was a lot of flux.
That makes total sense to me.
It made me think of that old optical illusion.
Yeah, that's cool. I actually just came across that when I was looking for images this past week, but I didn't download it, but I was just like, oh yeah, I remember seeing that before. Yeah. So now I'm like, I wish I downloaded, I could share it with you guys right now. But yeah, cool. Any other thoughts or questions? I'm gonna go through a few last things on my notes before we end. Because my invitation to you, particularly since we'll be doing the Pathworking next month, is to, if you're interested in this, please work with these magical images. If we've got 30 days until our next meeting and there's 10 images, you can develop a practice for yourself of working with each image for 3 days over the next 30 days and have them all familiar in your mind by next month when we do the Pathworking. So additional uses for the magical images, use them to explore other correspondences of the 10 Sephiroth, or you can use other these 10 magical images, if you're working with any kind of magical image or a tarot card or anything, just use it to explore whatever symbolism that image is knowledgeable about. And so when I say other correspondences of the 10 Sephiroth, if you go to the Sephiroth shortlist that I mentioned, and then you'll see that there's just a variety of additional symbols. There's gods, I call it cross-cultural deities. There's animals, there's herbs and incenses, things like that. You can incorporate any of those symbols into the scene and see how it augments the scene or helps you understand it better or changes the mood of it, and so on and so forth. Again, you can use them to learn about the Minor Arcana number cards, which is what we did today. Practice relating them to your life. And that can be by bringing it out into the world around you. When you, I had one student that based on this advice, how she enacted it is every time she left the house and stepped across the threshold and shut the door, she would ask, whatever Sephiroth she was studying, in this case Malkuth, she would say, how does Malkuth show up in my life today? And then she would go about her day, and by the end of the day she could look back and say, oh, you know what, this and this were all examples of the energy of Malkuth. Or you know, if you want to put it in terms of the young woman on the throne, these were all examples of how that showed up in my life today. Learn how to get answers to questions. That's the idea, that these are guides. And so being able to connect with this energy and actually ask questions, I didn't really encourage that so much in this particular meditation we did today, but because I really wanted to focus on the idea of receiving and just being in the presence of that energy. But then ultimately you can get very conversational with these, ask questions and learn from them. And how they respond to you. That's also why it's important to first just learn to receive. When you receive, do you hear, you know, does the person start talking to you? Do they change how they look? Do they start moving or making particular movements? Do other symbols start to show up around them? Do you see other things? Do you start to smell incense or something else? I mean, there are lots of ways of getting information. So be aware of your strengths and what just naturally comes up. But these responses can be, you can ask questions and then be aware of any of these different types of responses. Of course, there's other uses, including pathworking, which we'll do next month, as well as spiritual development and mind, body, spirit healing. Next month, the meetup is Saturday, December 17th, same time, same channel, 9:30 a.m. here at the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup. And there's, again, the additional resources. So I hope you guys all liked this. Any questions, thoughts, comments before we close?
Yeah, that was great, Joy. Thank you. It was cool. Like, I usually don't bring in those minor arcanas so much with just that. So it was cool having to like work on integrating more of that. I usually stick more with like the symbols and the colors and the elements. And so that'll be something new I'll start looking at more for sure.
Awesome. Cool.
Joy, for me, this really kind of pulls together a lot of stuff into one understandable, I don't know, previous to this, I guess the tree of life was still kind of a real mystery, mystery to me, but this really kind of pulls together all the connections between the tarot cards and images and colors and everything. So it's really, I appreciate that part of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool.
Yeah, this is new to me. This is totally new doing this, so this is great. So
Okay, good.
that's all I have to say.
Well, thanks everybody for coming, and hopefully you I'd love it if you were inspired and worked with this over the next month, and next week or next month when we do the tarot pathworking, you can come in already like being confident with your magical images, because that'd be really cool. So see you next time. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.